Hello, everyone.
Hello, everybody. This is Constance from Mysterious Galaxy. I want to thank everyone so much for joining us tonight. I am super excited because we're celebrating two awesome things: food and cooking, which just makes everyone happy, and D&D, which is just ridiculously awesome in and of itself and doesn't even need food to bribe you to come to this event, but it's like two amazing things in one. So how could you not want to be here? And I am super excited. Today we have Kyle Newman, who is diagonally right down there, and then Jon Peterson, who is right there, and then Michael Witwer, who is right down here, or Mike. And I am going to go ahead and let them take it away because their knowledge of D&D is way more vast than mine, and their knowledge of cooking is also equally, probably way more vast than mine. So they will have lots of fun things to share with you. Thank you so much to everyone for joining, and also shout out to the Mysterious Galaxy group that meets for D&D. Woohoo! Okay, I will let you guys take it away, and I will see you at the end of the event. Oh, and I almost forgot the Vanna White section, which is terribly important. If you have any questions where it says ask a question down below, as that would imply if you have a question, make sure that you ask it down there. And also, you're in quarantine. Learn some recipes. Add them to, your skill set and whatnot. And the best way to do this is to go and buy the cookbook. I know I'm biased as a bookseller, but there's a buy button right down there for you guys. And now I will go ahead and let Kyle take it away. Have a great event, guys.
Thank you for that introduction. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Thank you, Mysterious Galaxy. We are big fans, and we appreciate your continued support of our Dungeons and Dragons obsession / endeavors.
Yeah, actually, when we came out with Art and Arcana a few years ago, and all three of us worked on that, we actually did an event at Mysterious Galaxy, which was really cool. That a lot of people came out for, and kind of talked to the book, and very exciting.
Yeah, I mean, it's the one thing you can say about D&D is its community is so strong, and it's grown in stature and strength over the pandemic, and you can't keep D&D players down. The isolation didn't stop us from finding ways to play, to congregate, and what we wanted to do with this book was add an extra level of immersion to your game. And you can still, even though you're in the pandemic, there's still so much value in this book. That's what we're excited about. And the holidays are upon us, and it's all about feasting and community, and maybe you're going to be getting together with people again. And regardless, maybe there's a way for you guys to also add dimension to your games. You can cook the same things and bring the spirit of the tabletop to your game night. So you wouldn't go on an adventure without a great adventuring party without getting killed, and I wouldn't go on an adventure without these two guys because they make the supreme party. Joining me are my co-authors. They're also my co-authors on Dungeons and Dragons Art and Arcana, which came out in 2018, which Jon mentioned. There's the Tour of Horror shirt, our tour shirt. That was a visual history of Dungeons and Dragons, a passion project for us all. And Michael Witwer and Jon Peterson, who I'll get to more. And our fourth member was Sam Witwer, Michael's brother and a longtime friend, lifelong D&D player as well. That was our team on that. We reunited for this book. Unfortunately, Sam wasn't able to join the party on this one. He stayed back at the inn and ate the food while we went out on this adventure. But like I said, I couldn't fathom doing any D&D book. We've formed such a great team together, and we all bring something unique to the party, which is what you want with a D&D adventuring group. And Michael Witwer wears many hats and is an accomplished author and a D&D fanatic. And this group kind of started when I reached out to Michael with a crazy idea about writing a D&D book on the visual history and the history of the game. And Michael's book, Empire of Imagination, was a big inspiration. That's why I went right to Michael and said, we have to talk. Let's do this crazy thing. And I was familiar with Jon Peterson's work, but I had never met Jon Peterson. And Michael said, we can't do this without Jon Peterson. And I was like, if you know him, let's talk to him. This is amazing. So, like I said, our party expanded, and it made sense that we had to do this together. And we found this great rhythm communicating and researching and exploring and looking at things from multiple facets and point of views. And we then got approached by our publisher to, maybe pursue this crazy idea. And that's kind of where we're going to start this story. And I'll let these guys introduce themselves. You guys have anything more you want to say? I gave you a quick introduction, but I know you probably have a lot more. So, Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. I'm Michael Witwer. I'm thrilled to work with these two again on another project with 10 Speed Press under Penguin Random House. It's just been a dream. I originally, first book I worked on was Empire of Imagination, Gary Gygax, and the Birth of Dungeons and Dragons, which is kind of how I got into the space about writing about this stuff. I've been playing ever since I can remember. And then we worked on the Art and Arcana project, which was just I just loved every part of that. And then similarly, this was just an amazing thing. So again, I'm thrilled to be here. I'm joining from Chicago tonight, by the way. So for those of you who are in San Diego enjoying the beautiful weather and all the things, we snowed today. So I'm joining from chilly Chicago, and I'm really happy to be here.
Wow.
And I'm Jon Peterson. I'm actually in San Diego, so I'm enjoying the weather here. A bit of rain though. Actually, it's getting a little colder. This is as far as San Diego does transition to something like an autumn or maybe even a winter. Maybe we're feeling a little bit of it this week, which is a great time to be making all of these warming, hot, piping, steaming recipes that you will find in a book like this that will go down so well over the holiday season, as Kyle said. So yeah, I'm Jon, thrilled to be here, working with these guys again.
I'm up in Toronto. How did I not get snow? I've been transplanted up here for work. I didn't get snow yet. Jeez, what's happening? So Michael, let's start with you. Let's all put our heads together. Let's talk about how Heroes Feast, the official Dungeons and Dragons cookbook, and this is the first official Dungeons and Dragons cookbook ever made in its near 45-year history. It is dense, it is thick, it is comprehensive, and it needs a second volume. But let's just start with how this one came about.
Good question, Kyle. So this was really fun because it came out very organically. We were wrapping up literally in the last stages of Dungeons and Dragons Art and Arcana. The other book that we mentioned, which was, as we talked about earlier, we just love that book. That's another one to check out if you really like D&D and anything D&D related, the history of D&D, the visuals, which, the book has 700 images. So we were wrapping it up, and we had such a great experience with 10 Speed and the publisher over there. And our publisher, Aaron, came to us and said, hey, we've obviously been doing this great visual history with you, but, the thing we do a lot at 10 Speed, we do a lot of visually oriented books. And I happen to be over another imprint called Clarkson Potter. Then they're also very into other things like cookbooks. And so between 10 Speed and Clarkson Potter, you're talking about literally some of the biggest cookbooks you can find. For example, Aaron is the publisher of this little known cookbook series called Barefoot Contessa, for example. You've probably never heard of it, but it's known in some places. In any event, so Aaron said, hey, I've thought about this for a long time. I think this is, I would love to do a really high-end D&D cookbook, not gimmicky, really, really visually oriented, really bringing this game to life in a very real-world sense and focusing on food. And so we were really intrigued by this idea. Now we're all sitting there thinking, gosh, we all love food. We all cook in our own ways, but we're thinking, we're going to do this cookbook. How is this going to work? And so we really thought about it. And we really ideated with Aaron about, well, how can we really elevate the game through this book? How can we make the tabletop experience better by really exploring the food aspect of the game? And we came to this conclusion, wow, they're both really social experiences. They're both tabletop experiences. And so we really kind of went along that path and figured out just all of these different elements we could to make this not just kind of a themed cookbook, a cookbook you might just, say, here's a cookbook and throw a D&D logo on front. No, this book, we really, really wanted to speak for D&D, to advance the lore, and to really add a new dimension to the tabletop. So we obviously worked with Penguin, Random House, and with Wizards closely, and came up with what you see today. And that's not to forget this incredible team they built around us at 10 Speed, which we'll talk about later. But that's the kind of the origins of where it started.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for us when we were, presented with this opportunity was we wanted to be sure that we were not just branding, putting a logo on something, branding it. We wanted this to be a real exploration. We wanted it to have enough material to enhance your tabletop, your story beyond just the food, but also to explore the lore and all these things. So we wanted to make sure there was the room and the commitment to do that, and they were all about it. So being able to program it with extra information like that beyond recipes was just what made it something that we had to do. Jon, research, development, this is something that it was a big part of Art and Arcana. It's a big part of everything we're going to do because there's this storied history. It spans, nearly half a century. There's been numerous voices writing and bringing D&D to life, and we wanted to make sure we did justice to all that. Do you want to talk about how we approached this, the development of Heroes Feast?
Yeah, I mean, because it isn't as straightforward as it might be for some other media properties that are out there. I mean, I'm a big World of Warcraft fan. If you look at World of Warcraft, say, there are recipes baked into it. Those recipes have system effects. And really, if you're going to do a World of Warcraft cookbook, right, you just need to hit the right buttons of what all of those things are and sort them into the right categories and so on. And this was a tougher task because, I mean, although, food is not foreign to the D&D world, it's not something that has that kind of just linear, it's all just laid out in the player's handbook. These are the meals you can get at this place. This is what these people eat. And so we saw an opportunity here actually to contribute to the base lore of D&D, which is always something that we take very, very seriously, a very solemn responsibility, but also a very welcome one for those cases where that becomes available. But the way that, we framed that contribution was really with reference and reverence to the 45-year history of the game. And so we just went back through everywhere we could find that people talked about food. We went back through the novels, and there are quite a few, by the way, D&D novels over the years, and these have, of course, over time, things like Dragonlance and the Forgotten Realms novels, the Icewind Dale Drizzt novels, right? These have profoundly informed the character of the game. So going back to them was certainly one place we could mine to try to figure out what people eat in the D&D universes. Modules were another. We could find all these just quirky references. One of my favorites of these we have in it actually is, we're always kind of trying to, we have some goals for types of food we want to include, right? Because we want to, make sure we get vegetarian and vegan and things like that, in addition to cuisines that are going to suit everyone's palate. And so, we're looking for a way to do something like an Impossible Burger or, a kind of meat substitute that's plant-based. But in a module called the Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, which is an old Greyhawk era module, there's a reference to this crashed spaceship, right? Which is what the Dungeoneers are exploring in this case. This is an old tournament dungeon that was first run in 1976. There's a reference in that to surrogate steaks. And so sometimes it would just be two words like that, surrogate steaks, right? Enough for us to go on, contextualize it in the Barrier Peaks and kind of bring it forward. And, so it was just a blast going and finding those things and being able to play some small part in defining, how the fantasy cultures, how dwarves, elves, halflings, humans, and so on relate to food.
Yeah, I think that was the commitment we wanted to make, is that we didn't leave any stone or dungeon unexplored. We were after any reference, and even if it was just inspiration through ingredients. If we found out what was indigenous, what was mentioned, what was harvested or collected, or what they fished, that gave us a benchmark, at least to build off of, extrapolate, and then conceive, and always to do it with reverence towards what came before. And we did it judiciously because we didn't want to overstep, because there's this rich history, and when we want to add to it, we want to make sure it was adding something purposeful as opposed to being a gimmick. And I felt like, that was something I was very proud of, the way we all, had that restraint and reverence in that.
And we did, even in places where there have been recipes in the past in some books, like for Dragonlance, for, there's at least 2 or 3 books I can think of actually, and some even for Forgotten Realms as well, that have included a couple of recipes. We didn't want to just copy that. That's another thing we should be clear, is that, we want to make sure that we're hitting the things that are culturally most important to the D&D multiverses, but at the same time, these are new recipes that were especially developed for this book by experts who are much better at this than we are. And so,
cool. And Michael, we talk about, there's different cuisine, but going hand in hand with that, there are different cultural aspects. There's traditions, and there's different with that, I would say, eating habits that go along with unique food. Maybe give me an example with like elven food. What habits may go along with that in tandem?
Yeah, so that was one of the biggest parts of this book was in addition to doing the direct referential research we did between the novels and the modules and everything else, obviously all the core books, was then trying to figure out establishing a bit of a palette for these different fantasy cultures. So the notion that elves don't necessarily eat like dwarves, don't necessarily eat like halflings, right? And so we wanted to set some parameters around these different groups and just try to figure out from the texts what we could derive. And so you find a lot of really, really wonderful stuff when you do your research through that lens. Like anything else, right? We've all read a lot about D&D. We've studied it a lot, in a lot of different ways, whether you're doing biographies or doing books like Art and Arcana. And in this case, again, what's so cool about the aspect of the research was the idea of looking at everything through this research, this food lens. And so you come to realize, like, wow, when I read, I'll give you an example. When you read about this beautiful kind of pastoral scene that occurs late in the first Dragonlance book, where they're eating on this kind of big crystal and marble platform that overlooks the mountains over Qualanost, right? And they're eating this really light, delicious vegetable stew with cheeses and breads, but they don't mention meats very much. It actually talks about very specifically, they really don't eat meats very much. They grow fruit in their orchards, and they eat this iron ration. There's these jokes about this iron ration they eat called quithpa, which is basically dried fruit. And so those are wonderful clues to when you start trying to establish what do high elves and what do wood elves eat. And so we started using this as clues to kind of set general parameters and palette around these different fantasy cultures. So that was great fun. And so, you start to kind of pull back, the onion on that a little bit. And again, no pun intended. But you start to kind of land in these different areas where, everyone doesn't eat the same thing. And once you've established those parameters, you can start categorizing some of these foods. And that's obviously ended up being how we structure the book, was the idea of having different menus for humans and elves and halflings. And so it was really fun to do that, because in that respect, we really thought of it as just building a core book versus building a cookbook, right? This idea that let's approach this cookbook the same way that the people at Wizards of the Coast approach the player's handbook. But instead of focusing on spells and class descriptions and things like that, we're going to just focus on food, but not just recipes, right? We're going to focus on the different characteristics, the etiquette, the palate, the different ingredients these different cultures use. So that we go to a deep exploration of those things. And I think it adds a nice layer onto the rest of the actual cookbook itself.
Yeah, the rituals, the holidays, and obviously there's a lot of comparisons between these fictional calendars and ours, very purposefully, adapted like a Christian calendar from a pagan calendar. So I think that's where all the fun was, and that's what I was like, let's dive into this like it is a source book, but a source book that's like how do they source their food? How do they harvest it? Or if you live underground, is livestock readily available? No. What is indigenous to that environment? And it's freshwater fish or mushrooms, or so it really informed like these unique recipes, in this and then the Heroes Feast aspect of it, which is how do then you build like a more robust feast out of some of these combinations. And that was where it was the challenges, and we had a lot of ideas on the board. I mean, we had at one point 130 maybe recipe options, and we had to whittle it down. And there was, do we have too many breads? Do we have too many desserts? Do we have too many drinks, and non-alcoholic versus alcoholic? And so you're not just curating like a balanced view of each world, but you're also, curating this balanced menu. And then that's aggregated in a beautiful way into these suggested Heroes Feasts, which are very applicable, like coming up on this festive season. So you could plan an entire Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever, Hanukkah dinner based on some of these options here, if you're that adventurous, which I think is cool.
That was one of the questions. And again, it was fun to explore from that level. So consider, like, there's a good example of how we thought about the research and the conceptualization aspect. The notion, like, Hero's Feast, if that's a spell, or if you play D&D, you might know Hero's Feast is a spell. For 5th edition, I believe it's a cleric and druid spell. Maybe bard can cast it as well. But so, and again, the Hero's Feast, it basically says, it creates this huge table of food. In the 5th edition, I think you have to actually use like a chalice to make the Hero's Feast, a jeweled chalice. But again, this idea that, well, I wonder if you're an 11th level druid, when you cast Hero's Feast, do you make the same Hero's Feast as like a 9th level cleric? And again, we started just thinking along those lines because, again, it became this applicable line of thought. Like, let's define this a little bit. Let's figure out, if you're an elven druid, maybe you would make a very different Hero's Feast than somebody else would. So that was just a fun way to think about it. And that was kind of the level of detail and the extrapolation. We tried to take everything that was related to D&D food.
Yeah, I think that was the fun of it. Now, another big fun part of this book with visuals. We had a great time with the visuals in Arcana. It was how we planned the book around visuals. We rewrote the book around visuals. We rewrote it in a visual way where we just laid the book out and went through these conversations on the page. And, we wanted that to be just as active and exciting for the reader this time around. And I'm like blown away by the final product. When I finally got it in my hand, I was like, I love this book. It's you want to make the books that you want as a fan. That was our goal with Art and Arcana. That was our goal with this. It's like, if I'm going to do this with this team, and we don't want to make our talents wasted, we want to go all out. And I think everyone did a tremendous job. Jon, do you want to talk about photography in this book? Because that's a new aspect.
It is, and I mean, this is another kind of responsibility that ended up in our laps as we started working on this. The responsibility of taking D&D into the real world, right? To be something to be photographed. And if you go back through the great legacy of the artists that we covered in Arcana, I mean, there's actually very little like photography that's been used to represent D&D. You'll see artists who use photographs for their sources, and sometimes even TSR staff members will be obviously the models for various fantasy characters you'll find on the cover of modules as you go through the history of the game. But yeah, the notion that we had to be able to bring D&D enough into the real world that it could be photographed along with the food, that was an interesting challenge. And we had a blast with this. This was by far the most fun part of doing it. For two reasons. One is that we got to work with prop stylists to put together these set pieces that the food would appear in, right? And so we brought some loot from our own private stashes. We worked with top-notch professionals on this, and managed to just create all these phenomenal place settings. We got our friends at Beetle and Grimm. We from them poached a few items like coins and so on, been made for the Forgotten Realms for some of their deluxe box sets. We're able to use those as props along with the food. And we even went to the trouble of getting like 3D printed models made of a couple of magical items that appear throughout the text. And so you will spot those. You may, if you look, for example, at Arkham's, at the chili, well, that's the Chilton zombie there, which you can see with a certain, I don't know what that talisman there does. I really might be a little concerned if you found that to make sure that's being properly used. But you might see a hand of Vecna on one of the pages. And these are things that we had made specifically to be photographed with us. So, and the second reason it was a blast to do this is, of course, because we got to eat the food. Like after they shot the food, and we had, professional cooks who helped us with this, getting the actual food together for photography, we got to sample it. So we did get a pretty good sense of just what a professional would do if they made this stuff, which was really cool.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, that was one of the more fun aspects, was like actually taking some stuff that's only been visualized and in drawings and physically having them on set. And I think it gives the book an extra level of depth, which I'm excited about. And Justin Kobe Fields did an incredible job with those props. So Michael, not just photography, but original art original illustrations. You want to talk about all these things that were commissioned and why we made these choices on these particular landscape images?
So right, it wouldn't be a D&D book without really lavish illustration, and of course, a lot of that was covered necessarily by the photography, which was, as John mentioned, so cool. I mean, the team they put together for this. I can't tell you how privileged I feel to just be a part of it, because the people they had, the prop stylists, or I should say the food stylists, the prop people, the production designers, the photographers. I mean, unbelievable group of people. To say nothing, of course, of the chef, who was extraordinary, Adam Reed. What a joy it was to work with him. But right, so illustration. We wanted it to look like a D&D book and feel like a D&D book. And so we went to a lot of trouble to make sure that again, the textures, even the fonts, and of course the illustrations were D&D appropriate. And like everything else we did with the book, it was really important to approach the illustration design. Now, we worked really closely with the art designers at 10 Speed, who worked with a number of different groups to really put these pieces together. But we wanted to capture the adventure and the intrigue of regular D&D art, but it had to be through the lens of food, like everything else. So how do you do that? And one thing that we came up with as a team was this notion that, okay, I guess you could just show people eating all the time, but we can do better than that, right? And so nothing wrong with showing people eating and drinking, that's fine. But let's explore the entire food cycle. Let's explore sourcing, farming, hunting, anything that would be part of that food process, cooking. Let's get all of those into these original illustrations to really kind of show you the depth of the food cycle in the D&D universe, or I should say the multiverse. So that was a really fun aspect, was to be able to, again, capture that adventure, but do it through the lens of food. And so it wasn't always the obvious path in terms of what we would choose, but they did an incredible job. Again, it's another really real highlight of this book is the original illustration.
Yeah, I mean, the only missed opportunity for me, there was one picture we wanted, and it was adventurers out on the trail cooking dinner on their long rest, and a much larger apex predator dragon lurking behind them, and the humans not realizing they were going to be its meal. And that's part of the ecosystem of it, But we did get to really look at the different ways that food is explored, the rituals, the harvesting, and all that, and that was. So I love the art. I love those. You open it up, and you get these beautiful detail shots with photography. And we didn't want to just do more food illustrations, because you can't do it better than a luscious photograph that's so well lit and that captures it. So we're like, let's just open the book up and let it breathe between these chapters. And they really are great visual palette cleansers. So kudos to the art direction team there and the artists. John, besides eating on set, what was your favorite part about working on the book? Because I love that part.
It's hard to top that. I mean, having to test the drink recipes especially was kind of nice. Doing the mind flayer and some of the harder cocktails. I was a big advocate for getting as much of that as possible into it. I mean, for me, really, I've been studying the history of D&D for some time. And like anything that lets me get a fresh angle on it is, just energizes me. And it was this way with Art and Arcana, where, I'd never really looked at D&D through the lens of art before, through the lens of the visuals specifically. And that just ends up revealing things to me. So just through this process, I just ended up learning a lot about books that I hadn't really thought to consider part of, what I studied, right, in D&D. I hadn't really looked hard into like the Volos guides and things like that, for example, before doing this. So anything that opens up a new research dimension to me that just kind of lets me see more of the totality of the impact that D&D had and like how it got there, that's what gets me pumped.
Yeah. Michael, did you have any standout moments, benchmarks, favorite parts of this whole experience? It took almost 2 years from when we were pitched.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, no, I certainly did. Firstly, working with you two again, it's a dream come true, working with your friends, your longtime collaborators on something that you just love to do. You know, and I've been working in this space now for, you know, gosh, I don't know, 7 or 8 years. And I just, again, I hope to work in it forever. But I think my favorite parts, when I step back from it, I love to learn new things. I just do. And when I think about some of the biggest highlights for Art and Arcana, there was a bunch of new skill sets I personally had to develop, as we all did, to be able to do that book properly. You know, I remember, you know, showing up to photo shoots, and I bought a nice camera and trying to figure out how to like do all this stuff. Bought a light box, tried to learn how to light stuff, because again, a lot of that stuff was roll up your sleeves and do it yourself. Learning how to, you know, scan properly in the right ways and use Photoshop. So similarly with this book, it was a lot of the same things about learning. Well, for one thing, learning a lot about cooking that I didn't know. Yeah. I'm not even sure if I was a level 1 chef when we started, and I'm not sure if I'm any more than that. But I cooked through the book, so that was a huge fun thing for me, was to literally cook through the book and to share that experience with my wife and my family. So this was dinner this was dinner all summer, was some new recipe. And before that, I guess I started that probably in the beginning of the year. So this has kept us very busy through.
You were giving us those updates. The whole pandemic, there were these great updates. He's like, I tried this, you know, this Bitopian shepherd bread tonight. I tried the steak. I'm like, I was kind of jealous. And my family, I was inspired where I was staying to just cook. We did the knucklehead trout. We did the hand pies. Everyone was like, this is delicious. Like, at first they're like, fantasy, what? Like, I'm like, we're cooking hand pies tonight. And they're like, all right. And then they're like, geez, this is delicious. Like, well, what's the recipe? Everyone was like really into it. And you got to work your way through the entire book almost, right? Like,
yeah, no, I've cooked almost everything in there at this point. I'm actually saving the Homlet turkey for Thanksgiving. That was one I held on to. But no, so that was such a joy to be able to share it with my family and to really experiment with all these different wonderful recipes that Adam Reed obviously worked with Hassan to build. And you know, a lot of people have asked about that, so I might as well get ahead of it a bit. This notion that, of course, we spent all this time conceptualizing these dishes, right? And then trying to figure out how to convert them into our world, right? And so that was awful fun to be able to find, like John talked about, those surrogate steaks. Great. So we have this small mention, an expedition to the Barrier Peaks about what these are. So how do we bring that to reality? So we thought a lot about, you know, what that could be in our world and what ingredients that could be used, and then bringing that over to Adam Reed, who would take it obviously through conceptualization into a real dish that's not only can be made in our world, but is delicious. So I just thought that was such a fun part and something I never thought I would be doing. And I loved the heck out of it.
So much of Dungeons and Dragons is the familiar. That's what's great about fantasy and science fiction, is it plays off of the familiar. And we did seek new ways to take some tried and true stews and roasts and soups and breads, and how can you just do something just a little left of center, something that's just an atypical combination and that's reflective of, say, you know, pomegranates available in this region, and like combining that and using, you know, Adam's wonderful brain to unlock some of the challenges and looking at it like spell components, you know, like how can we make something that's both true to a halfling, but also different than anything you'd seen in another cookbook, but also delectable and also healthy. And what's the story element that goes with it, and the lore. So there were all these like fun boxes to check, and that was the challenge. That was the puzzle. For me, hanging out with you guys for another 2 years, getting to do this is the best. I mean, this is like, it's a dream to just write about stuff, you know, and like a lot of, I mean, you always hear this advice when you're a writer, because I do screenwriting and I'm a filmmaker by day. I'd rather, you know, just do this all day. But I love what I do. But this is there's something pure about this, because you're just like, I want to write about this, and we do it together. But it's always like this notion of write what you know, and that's terrible advice to all the writers out there. It's terrible. That's called living in an echo chamber. So write about what you want to know. Write about what you want to wake up and research and explore. And for me, I'm not nowhere near the D&D expert that Michael and John are. But it would take a lifetime to catch up to them. And John's research and his access to it is incredible. But so I learn from them, and I write about, and then I get to say, oh, today I'm gonna study this. I'm gonna go explore this. and then that becomes what I'm passionate about writing, as opposed to just well, I know this second nature, you know. And I think we all got to do that because this wasn't a normal thing for us, you know. From the minute I met Jon, he knew where every great restaurant was in any city we were in, and he was just this amazing food, you know. And then the exploration of food was so big for him. So I think for all of us, this was not what we ever anticipated doing or making, but suddenly we're like, but it also makes sense, and this was something we wanted to set out and explore together. And that was the fun of it. I did like the stuffed egg battered toast. It was like kind of like an old recipe that I'd always made for my family and friends, and with this orange marmalade as syrup drizzle. We put a little ring reference in there to the One Ring off to the side, and one of those halfling recipes too. Those little things like that are fun. So I guess, you know, one thing we should talk about too, which is very cool before we get to questions, we're about to get to questions, is in-universe menus. And another way to visualize this is not just food and not just art, but, you know, when you go to an inn or a tavern and these esteemed establishments, some of them sinful and unsavory, and others, much more refined. We wanted to present the menus with pricing and give you a sampling of what it might look like if you sat down at a cider stained table and somebody slid over a menu. What were your options? What's the fare? What might be? And the recipes that we couldn't fit in the book, or were just a little bit too exotic, or the ingredients were a little bit too intrinsically fantasy, we were then able to research and then reference on these menus. So a lot of what you see here, some of them are just, nods to what was in different Volo guides, Volo's guides to Cormier, Volo's guides to the Dale Lands. All of these things were read front to back, and everything exciting we could was pulled from it. And like I said at the beginning, we've got enough to like make a beautiful companion to it, which is really exciting. So
if everybody buys it, we will. So if we buy it.
It's the holidays are coming up. You have to make a turkey. You have to make Thanksgiving. There's recipes in here for everything. Every year it's the same turkey at your house. I know. You can make something different this year. This is on you. So get the book and spice up your life. Okay. So, but those recipes, those menus are so cool. Like, that's what I think is fun if you're a dungeon master and you can sit down and throw these menus out. Maybe it inspires you to make ones with the pricing and the ingredients and the options. And I think that's what's fun if you're doing, even if you're homebrew and you're not playing in these four realms. It definitely is a launching point for you to then go create the menu for maybe your home tavern. So should we get to questions from these amazing people who've been waiting? I'm going to do this button. I think I hit this button and it says ask a question. Boom.
Yeah, and look, it looks like they can vote up and vote down, so maybe start at the top.
Hey, what is your favorite recipe? We can do these quick so we can get through a lot of these questions. What's your favorite recipe? Let's start with Jon.
I like the vet bread, I think, actually. This is just because the way it was made when we were doing the shoots was so awesome. I just fell in love with it immediately.
Cool.
Yeah, for me, the two sections, I'm going to start there. The two sections that I like best, I loved the Elven section and the Halfling section best. Everything's delicious. So I don't want to make it sound like, oh, don't eat from the human section. It's all great. But the Halfling and the Elven section, I loved almost everything in there, or really liked, even the stuff that wasn't quite as much for me. My favorite single dish, I think, was the dragon salmon. If you like salmon, the sauce with that was like out of this world. I remember my mother-in-law was in town at the time, and she's from the Pacific Northwest. They eat a lot of salmon. She loves salmon. She's a wonderful cook, and she just absolutely it knocked her socks off. She asked for the recipe immediately, and that's how I knew it was as good as I thought it was. So yeah, the dragon salmon was my favorite. That's an Eberron dish that we did. That was actually a half-elf dish. So that was kind of a neat one.
Yeah, I mentioned I love that, the stuffed egg battered toast. Something more savory and relevant. Icewind Dale is all hot right now. Everyone's playing their Icewind Dale Frost Maiden campaign. There is pan-fried knucklehead trout. So don't be a knucklehead. This one's delicious. It's totally germane to your campaign. Pull up the recipe. Bring it over next time you play. If your dungeon master should not be cooking. We get into some of these things in the book. You know, the dungeon master has a lot on their plate. They don't need to cook for you too. So this is where you can contribute and bring something to the table. Your dungeon master spends weeks preparing. There's also things in here that don't even, like, there's kith pa, and there's iron rations and things that are simpler, things you can prepare in advance. And that's what I think is cool. That's what I like. So not everything has to be made and be brewing right next to the table while it's happening, or slow cooked. So there is a good dessert in here called Meal's End. It's Elven. And it's I would say a variation on an English eaten mess, and involves like fresh cream, berries, and this time a chocolate meringue. That's quite delicious.
Yeah, that was my favorite dessert as well. The Meal's End. I loved that.
Yeah. And there's stuff for vegetarians and vegans. There's just a lot of options. So for every type of eater. So another question here. I'm not a very good cook, honestly, says Jonathan M. Which recipes should I begin with? So, who wants to take this one?
I think Michael, with your vast experience, what do you think's like a good beginning?
Yes, I'm actually paging through. Well, so great question, Jonathan. And you know, it's funny. So when I made my own notes, I actually I rated every dish on a level 1 through 9, like one would do for spells. That's exactly how I rated these. And I don't think there was any 9s in the book, at least in my estimation. So this is completely arbitrary, but I made my own notes. That's actually how I did it. And so again, I'm looking through, like, there are things like iron rations, which are really just as simple. Again, they're trying to match what iron rations might be in the D&D universe. Of course, more to our tastes and more delicious, certainly. But, you know, that one is kind of a simple matter of throwing together dried fruits and biscuits or Triscuits, nuts and things like that, and kind of putting them together. Like, things like that, of course, are very simple. Most of the drinks, anyone could make. Again, if you've ever made any kind of mixed drink, most of the drinks are really, really simple. I'm kind of paging through right now. Like, I'm trying to remember the stuff that was like super simple. A lot of it was a lot simpler than I thought, to be honest with you. Again, I'm not a great baker, but I made all of this stuff. And again, you have to follow the recipes carefully, especially if you're baking, or if you're making Troll-Tide candy apples, for example. But Oddix skillet fried potatoes. There's one that people ask about anyway. So we have, of course, Oddix fried spiced potatoes here. Those are really simple. That's just making, skillet fried potatoes. I would say most things in this book are pretty beginner. Yeah.
I think a soup. The benefit of a soup is you're going to cook it slow, and it literally adds this aromatic fragrance to your house. Like, I love this. When a soup is cooking all day on a Sunday, stuff like that it's not like you have to get it just right in terms of the pinkness of the meat or something. There's something I find simpler to that. Maybe I've just made a lot of soups, but I think something like that's not bad for beginners. And the steps take you through a lot of these things. There's not a lot of I found room for error. We tried to be explicit, and Adam especially tracks what you need to do and really gets into detail on the types sometimes of ingredients, not just leaving it blanketly like generic. Like, if something works better, it tends to be clarified as such. Here's a question. Caroline.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Caroline Hackenberg says, which setting was your favorite to find dishes for? John, do you want to start there? Maybe would you like?
Well, so we focused really on 4 main settings. Did we cover this? I don't even remember. So Greyhawk, Dragonlance, Forgotten Realms, and Eberron. And kind of Eberron is a bit of the odd man out in that, you might think. So there's a respect in which finding things for Eberron was a lot of fun for me, and figuring out what would be in the Celestial Vista. And this is where Mike's dragon salmon and so on came from. And so there are the Bitopian shepherd's bread. Because there's a deep lore that you kind of need to go through to get that. That was a lot of fun to investigate. But whereas for Dragonlance, there's lots of just obligatory things we had to do, right? Like Oddix, spiced potatoes. In Forgotten Realms, there's a wealth of information from the Bolos guides, especially about like what cuisine is like in Waterdeep, and Ed Greenwood has just written so much about the Forgotten Realms overall. You just have so much data about what game is available, what's cultivated in different regions and things like that. And so from a research perspective, there was a wealth of information to go on there as well. And, you know, when Greyhawk is Greyhawk, I mean, you really kind of go off of the, you know, there's a reference there being a gingerbread man in Castle Greyhawk. And, like, you know, he's got a big raisin on him. If you stab the raisin, he dies. Can we make a dish out of that? Yes, we can. And so, you know, but it's really just taking these very one-off things like that. So researching all of them was different. And we also have some things in there from Barovia, right? There are a few other settings that at least get a mention in there. Unfortunately, I couldn't really do much with Planescape, one of my favorites. But that's you probably don't want to eat any of the things that were offered in
Archon's Chili. You have to mention some characters. Elminster. We talk Raceland. So not just, you know, settings, but also some characters were touched upon if it was really part of their narrative in a way. So that was fun. You know, we are not just, I wouldn't say this is just a pure 5th edition, but I don't think 5th edition is pure 5th edition. 5th edition looks backwards so often, and it's a commentary and an expansion on what came before. And you even look at Icewind Dale right now, which is the latest publication by Wizards of the Coast, and it's set, you know, 100 years after Crystal Shard, and there's a timeline to it, and everything goes back and still incorporates the past, and it doesn't throw it away. And the different editions of D&D have always done that, and we tried to do the same thing. We didn't just want this to be what was mentioned in 5th edition, but what was mentioned in you know, the whole expanse. So it goes back to the beginning, and all the way up to, you know, present day publication. So here's one. Which countries most influenced the recipes in the book / are closest to the D&D world? This is from the Mysterious Galaxy Bookstore, but who's it from? Okay, well, there's a question. That's a good one.
I mean, I think it varies.
I mean, we tried to cover, we tried to cover the whole gamut of anything that would be, you know, referential to real world. I mean, again, a lot of times, you know, take Forgotten Realms. A lot of the dishes that Ed Greenwood writes about are, if they're not real dishes, they're made with things that we can relate to. He loves mushrooms, for example. There's a lot of mushroom dishes. There's a lot of roast meats, and yeah, Kyle's not the biggest fan of mushrooms.
I tolerated them.
I love mushrooms. That's right. But so yeah, in a way, it's a hard question to answer, because we really just tried to match the food to what was kind of mentioned in the different D&D lore, and then in some cases we had to translate those ingredients into real world things. I'll give you an example. Rothe are Forgotten Realms like buffalo, kind of. They're almost like banthas. If you ever like an illustration of what a Rothe is, and so that's kind of like their beef that they'll eat in certain areas of the Forgotten Realms and in the Underdark. So again, we basically had to say, okay, well, that's kind of like buffalo or beef, and so we would, you know, we could make dishes and extrapolate things with recipes that they might make that with, but it was a lot of, and again, it was a lot of fun to be able to kind of take these things and figure out exactly where we might place them with regard to ingredient, but we wouldn't necessarily always just say, oh, this is like food from this place or that. It was a little bit of a different research process than that.
Here's one. It says, "What gives you jerks?" This should be what I'm writing about. Volo G. I'm just kidding. Here's a question for you guys. Honeymead from Keep on the Borderlands Tavern is 1 gold piece. 1 gold piece? That's really expensive. What the hell do you think is in that stuff? Says, I don't know who asked that one. A mystery comment, but what do we think here? 1 gold piece. Our pricing was a lot of. We researched this and we really debated pricing too. Obviously, things are written in different time periods.
Well, so we have a recipe for Evermead in the book, and of course, Evermead is no. So it's a. So for context, it's not real mead, at least by definition. For one thing, like making real mead can give you like botulism. Like real mead can be a problematic thing to make for a regular cookbook. So we do have a drink that's that kind of matches what we think Evermead tastes like, which is of course a very, very famous Elven Mead from Evermead, which is extremely rare and extremely expensive. So the honey mead part, in terms of one gold piece, that does seem really expensive for. I mean, because honey mead is like regular mead, as far as I know. John, what do you know?
Yeah, I think it is. I think you have to have honey in it for it to be mead. But I'm sure I could, make up something off the cuff about how at the Keep of the Borderlands, of course, that mead was being made by a certain, species of magical bees that, first created the honey, and that actually confers some kind of a benefit to you if you consume it. But most likely it's just a reflection of the fact these early source books, they were a little up and down in terms of especially luxury pricing for commodities. You see things, in the first few years that they're kind of all over the place in terms of how they priced them. So there wasn't a lot.
Well, of course, resources are very scarce at the Keep.
Yes,
that's a fundamental problem with being at the Keep, right? Like resources are extremely scarce. So that probably explains it more than anything. I hadn't thought of that, but like they're having all of these caravans being raided and stuff like that. Like, they probably have a lot of trouble getting meat or making meat there. That might be simple as that.
And if you're looking to make your own menus, or you're looking to really deep dive into, what's regionally available, one great resource for Forgotten Realms was the Aurora's Guide, and that had some pricing in there, and it did indicate for me researching it sometimes the scarcity of things, and also it's regional. Is this being imported from somewhere else in Ontario? Just looking at it that way, is this something that's deemed exotic, and what's the point of view of exotic? Or it depends. Some of this stuff, within your campaign, if you're on a different continent or you're down in Chult, things might be indigenous and pricing might change. That was fun though. That's a great deep dive. That's an old book that you can find out there, and it'll help you build your own menus. And it's maybe if you're just world building and you want to get into food in general as a dungeon master, it really helps you codify it and get really detailed. And the stuff that Ed Greenwood done in particular for Forgotten Realms is incredible. It's so well cataloged and beautifully detailed, and it's a great reference tool. So a lot of these things are essential in our research, but we did look at all of them, because you couldn't build a comprehensive book like this unless you absorbed it all and then were able to put it back on the page. Here's a question from Matthew Berger. You guys did a lot to evoke the world that these foods came from in an economy of words. Did a lot get left on the proverbial chopping board? Matthew Berger. Yes,
quite a bit did. As Kyle mentioned earlier, we could probably do a second one of these books even, if it was ascertained that there was demand for such a thing to be. I mean, a lot of things honestly got left on the chopping board because we wanted to make these accessible recipes, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that could be done with, if you look at like the Game of Thrones cookbook, there's like snake recipes and things like that. And we weren't really going to put out things like that, but even dishes with, venison or, game meats, those were things that we didn't really do too much with.
There's manticore steaks, that are available in Waterdeep, and there's very exotic things, and obviously you can pay homage to them, reference them, but there's only so much you can do, like in our world with what's available, and it was a challenge. It's one of the challenges. We walked a fine line with that. Here's one. Hey Kyle, for me, if you had to get rid of one ingredient in this book, what is it, and why would it be mushrooms? Because they are, to me, not my favorite, filthy, and there's some mushrooms that'll even zombify an insect and take over their brain. I don't trust them completely, but there's some beautiful mushroom photography in here, and I was like, I'd maybe actually try that. So
there's fantastic mushroom steaks. We have a great mushroom tea that's like an adobe mushi style, like a Japanese mushroom tea. So yes, there are some few things for the mushroom lover, and you can count me in that category in the book.
Yeah, and I would say like what John mentioned there, like the influence behind it. Just like these planets are so diverse in their topography and their culture, all of the recipes aren't pulled from American or Euro tradition. There are things that are more expansive and look at different cultures. That was also one of the goals, to represent, you know, as much of a whole planet and an ecosystem as you could, and doing it with what's been referenced. Here's one. How was it collaborating with a chef to create the recipes? Did you taste as you go? How was the back and forth? You want to try that one, Michael?
Yeah, so that was a fascinating process, and our editor at 10 Speed did a tremendous job. She's brilliant. She's also a professional chef, among other things, which is probably a prerequisite for being a cookbook editor, among other things. So she did a lot of translation for us, because, you know, we were tasked with really figuring out what was appropriate for these different realms, and what would be appealing and appetizing, what might make a menu. And of course, then we had to write head notes. We had to figure out what the lore was, and then codify it. And that's what you see on top of every recipe in the book. There's a head note that kind of tells you about the background of it, where it's from, et cetera, et cetera. And so a lot of times what we would do is we would either write that outright, or we would write an early version of that. And that is what Adam Reed was given, because that was the most baked, you know, kind of conceptualization that we had done. And then he would take that and kind of run with it. And then typically what would happen is we would get questions, often back through our editor, kind of saying, okay, you know, Adam is asking about this. Is this a reasonable substitute? What kind of ingredients might be appropriate for this? And I would say a quarter to a half of the time, we would actually have to say, no, we can't do that because of this. Or there's this lore thing that says we can't do this. So it was really, really fun to kind of go back and forth and explore these things. And have to kind of, you know, again, kind of geek out in this really interesting way by kind of applying these rules that have been kind of built around us as we discovered these kind of different, in some cases, restrictions, and in some cases, opportunities. So it was really cool. That was how it worked.
Great. Now here's another cool one. It's fresh comment here. Have you fairly represented hobgoblin or orc cuisine? What does halfling taste like? So it's a two-part question. Fairly represented, I would say, compared to humans, I would say no. But I would say that humans expand across these planets more rapidly and pervasive than some of the other cultures. They're explorers and expansionists, and they're more adaptable to all different types of environments, and therefore we probably get into human recipes more than anything in this book. It's also, many people choose to play as humans, you know, and when they're playing D&D, and that's your portal in. I would say we don't really have a hobgoblin recipe in here, do we?
No, we have at least 2 orc recipes.
Yeah.
We have orc bacon. We have a lamb dish, a braised lamb dish. That's delicious. That's an orc dish. I don't think we have anything that's specific to hobgoblin, though. So that there would be an opportunity for volume 2.
Volume 2. I was going to say, I'm going to write that down. The orc dish is stems from the Min-Max tribe. There's a character I play in the Joe Manganiello's War of Dragons Death Saves campaign named Calatur Min-Max, and I give a little nod to that character in the description. And it's this, it's a braised lamb, and that was one of the earlier ones we wanted to get in there. Looking at the way some cultures, you don't expect them to be foodies, you know, but there are these traditions within them that have always been there, and why wouldn't food be just as rich and interesting to them as some of the other cultures? So that was fun, and definitely the uncommon section of this book. That's kind of became a catch-all, but allowed us to really give nods to this truly diverse and expansive these worlds, these cultures, and these playable characters. So. We definitely.
And by the way, we do have a dish. We do have they'd asked about halfling, and we do have a dish that is originally made with halfling. Of course, we don't recommend it for our real world recipe, but Archon's halfling chili, of course, is made with halfling in the D&D universe, and that's a dragonborn dish. So yeah, again, we did try to represent things like that, and that was a lot of fun. That's obviously Joe Manganiello's character.
I would say, what does halfling taste like? It tastes like abyssal chicken. So we love how you approach this book with so much respect for the world of D&D. What culture did you find the hardest to translate into recipes for the modern human? That's good. I mean, we're challenges. John, do you want any insight into that one?
Tiefling?
Yeah.
Like any demonic beings, I mean, those are tough. You know, we looked a bit at Tiefling and Azamar, and you'll see some references to that, like as you go through the book. Just because there are, Dragonborn, I think, is another good example. You know, there just are fantasy cultures that probably do not have a palate very similar to that of Earthlings, and so. But we made an effort. I mean, we did. So we have, you know, the abyssal chicken, right? It's a good example of that, for trying to reflect what the approximation of that would be. And the orc bacon, which is the other orc dish, again, we can kind of pawn off a bit as being a half-orc thing. This really, you know, explains as you read our head note for the recipe. Well, this is, you know, the way orcs prefer it. This is probably what you would do if you were preparing this as a human. You might put some honey on this or something to kind of balance it out rather than, you know, so no pitch needs to go into your dishes if you're not a tiefling anyway.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the, sometimes you get to, you know, one of these cultures like tiefling, and you guys, their palate isn't easily translatable. There was a reference to a tiefling, a spice. I think it was a fire spice that is basically caustic to humans. So there's certain things where you just can't. It might be something that they enjoy or is traditional to them, but it's not actually, you know, edible for. And it's hard to translate something inedible, you know. So if that's like a common spice, then you're like, okay, then we're gonna talk about it and reference it in different ways. But we did find a way to get something in there. Here's a puzzle of a question: a halfling fight in AD&D. One you can only advance to level 6 and no further. Halfling fighter. A half orc can only progress to level 4 as a cleric. Does that mean a halfling fighter and a half-orc cleric could never hope to cook a level 7 or 8 recipe together?
I'm really starting to wonder what the identity is. It's maybe someone we know who is posing these questions. Someone we could recruit as a moderator for a future panel, because some of these, they're just great.
Yeah, that's an interesting question there. I wonder who that is.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this question has an answer. I mean, we'll have to think about the cooking mechanic more, perhaps. I mean, well, for example, I mean, I guess maybe we're assuming that recipes, for example, have like a level 1 through 9, which may not be accurate. Maybe they're more like clerical spells, level 1 through 6. I mean, there's so many questions I guess one could explore. And again, good reason to do a sequel book in 2021. So we'll see you then.
I love that answer, and that's a good segue into me having to come and interrupt and be the villain of this saga in which I must make it end. For we are at the hour mark, ladies and gentlemen, and it is time for us to let them go to sleep depending on what time it is. I mean, I'm an insomniac, so that's never going to happen, and I know half the people out there are going to be up late. But I just want to say thank you so much, Michael, John, Kyle. This was an absolute treat, pun intended. And this was just so much fun. I know I now want to go buy the cookbook. My roommate just sent a photo of it to her brother, and that is now going to be her Christmas gift. So you have done a remarkable job in convincing 2 people on this side of the screen that we are now going to go and make delicious recipes with this book. So thank you guys so much for spending this evening with us. I had to eat the whole event, so I wasn't drooling, and I'm just hungry, and I think a lot of the readers are as well. So thank you so much to everyone for attending. Thank you so much to our authors, just for all the love, respect, and care that you put into this. It's not a gimmick, as you guys were saying. It's not gimmicky. It's like a true D&D, just awesome book, which is so special. So good night, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Go buy this amazing book. Make yummy food at all of your campaigns, and we will see you guys on the next one. Goodbye.
Thank you, Constance.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.